The afternoon light in Napa Valley fell over the rows of grapevines like a purple veil, scented with soil and wine. I stood in the middle of my son's wedding, wearing a simple navy blue dress, very different from the designer gowns surrounding me. The champagne flute trembled in my hand when I heard the laugh of Victoria, the new bride, clear and sharp, like breaking glass. "That's my mother-in-law, an old hag." No one else heard it, but in that instant, I felt the whole world tilt. I smiled, swallowing the salty taste in my throat. It wasn't tears. It was the memory of 20 years living under a mask. And then came the moment she led me to her parents. I bowed my head, maintaining my courtesy, but her father, a silver-haired businessman, looked at me as if he were seeing a ghost. His glass of red wine froze in midair, spilling onto his daughter's dress. Rose Ellison from R.E., capital is, you? All the laughter and music seemed to cut out instantly, and in the sunset light tinged with red, I understood that the secret I had kept for 2 decades had just been revealed at my own son's wedding. I am so happy you are here. If you are watching this video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me where you are listening to my story from in the comments. We love knowing how far our stories reach. The knock on the door came right at 7 a.m., 3 soft, regular taps, but enough for me to recognize him immediately. David. My son never came home at that hour, much less after a wedding that had ended almost at dawn. I left my coffee mug on the table and adjusted the shawl on my shoulders. When I opened the door, the cool wind of Queens rushed in, smelling of fresh bagels from the bakery on the corner and the lingering dampness of the night. David was there with his shirt wrinkled, his tie stuffed in his pocket, and dark circles under his eyes. "Mom, what happened last night?" His voice sounded hoarse, tired, mixed with anger, the voice of someone who hasn't slept enough and can't find peace. I stood motionless for a moment. That question wasn't just about the wedding. It was about all the years I had chosen to stay silent. I stepped aside and motioned for him to enter. "Sit down, son. I'll make you some coffee." The small kitchen filled with the soft light of the morning. The sound of boiling water and the aroma of hazelnut coffee brewing helped alleviate the tension a little. David sat at the old wooden table, hands clasped, staring into the void. I placed 2 mugs in front of us, took a deep breath, and took a seat. "Maybe it's time I told you a few things," I began in a low voice, afraid of breaking something fragile between us. "I think I already know what you're hiding, Rose," he interrupted. His dark eyes shone with a mixture of pain and mistrust. "Last night, when Victoria's father recognized you, everyone froze. I've never seen that man look so scared. Who are you, really?" I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. The sound of the metal spoon stirring the coffee seemed to echo like a drum. "I am still your mother, David, but there are parts of my life I hid to protect you." He looked up, furrowing his brow. "Protect me from what?" "From the truth that you aren't the common woman you claim to be?" That question hurt more than any insult from Victoria. I looked out the window where the sun was starting to paint the brick wall across the alley in golden tones. "When your father was alive, he invented a new battery technology. We sold it and obtained a considerable sum larger than you can imagine. But we didn't tell anyone. We invested in silence. I kept the secret so you would grow up as a man who knows the value of work, without the shadow of money corrupting you." David leaned back in his chair and let out a bitter laugh. "So while I worked 10 hours a day counting every dollar to pay for my apartment, you could have bought the whole building without signing a single paper, right?" I remained silent. It is strange. There are moments when a mother can only endure her son's anger as a deserved penance. I didn't want you to lose faith in effort. Your father always said, "Let him walk alone. He has to feel how the wind of life blows." I just followed his words. David observed me for a long time. Then he nodded slightly, although reproach still burned in his eyes. "And Victoria, Mr. Sterling. Did they know anything?" "No, no one knew. Until last night." The sound of my phone broke the thick air. On the screen appeared Danielle Parker, my financial advisor for almost 10 years. I opened the message, feeling my pulse in my throat. "Mrs. Ellison, the SEC has just opened a new review on 2 trusts in the name of the R.E. Capital subsidiary. Someone might be trying to access the archives. We need to talk immediately." My fingers trembled as I set the phone on the table. David looked at me with renewed suspicion. "SEC? Trusts? Mom, what is going on?" I bit my lip, trying to stay calm. It must be a routine audit. I'll call Danielle later. No, Mom. I want to know, since when you have your own firm, and since when you're afraid of the Securities and Exchange Commission. I let out a short, bitter, metallic laugh. I'm not afraid of them, son. It's just that when people find out I'm behind too many major operations, the questions start, and I'm not sure you're ready to hear all the answers. David fell silent. He stood up and rested a hand on the back of the chair as if he needed support. Mom, I'm not mad because you're rich. I'm mad because you thought I couldn't understand. His words tightened my throat. I looked at his face, this man I once held in my arms, who now looked at me as if he had just discovered the hidden face of his mother. Maybe I was wrong, I said with a raspy voice. But let me solve this first. If anything happens, I'll tell you everything, I promise. David held my gaze for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. I believe you, Mom. But I won't let anyone hurt you. Not even Victoria. I touched his hand gently. That warmth restored my calm. When the door closed behind my son, the room fell silent. I picked up the phone and opened Danielle's message again. At the end, there was a short line added a few minutes ago. Rose, the request comes from Sterling and Associates. They are the advisors for Victoria's family. I closed my eyes. The coffee cooled slowly on my lips. Outside, the voice of a street vendor selling pretzels echoed through the sunlit street, just another morning in New York City, except that inside me, a storm had just begun. Noon in Manhattan shone like molten gold over the shop windows. Traffic moved slowly down Fifth Avenue, reflecting light off dark suits and silk dresses. I arrived 10 minutes early and sat alone at a table by the window, from where I could see the purple flowers in the planters outside. The smell of white wine and the faint clinking of silverware created an elegant and strangely tense atmosphere. When Victoria walked in, I knew instantly she had prepared this meeting, and not to apologize. Her chestnut hair slightly waved, the white blouse buttoned to the collar, the Hermes bag hanging from her arm, everything calculated, like a strategy. She walked toward me with a smile so perfect it was fake. Thanks for coming, mother-in-law. Her voice was sweet as sugar, but her gaze cut like a knife. I nodded without responding. The waiter approached and poured 2 glasses of Sauvignon Blanc. The golden liquid moved with bright sparkles, as if announcing something was about to happen. Victoria opened her bag and took out an old, laminated newspaper clipping. Recognize this photo, Mom? I took a glance. The business section of the Wall Street Journal from 3 years ago, featuring the image of the acquisition of Sterling Holdings. In a blurry corner, unmistakable, was me. Navy blue suit, head slightly tilted, hand on a folder. A moment later, I heard the slight tap of the wine in my glass. She looks a lot like you, doesn't she? She said, leaning back with a smile that shone as if she had found the first crack in a mirror. Keeping my calm, I replied, the press likes to exaggerate. Old photos, angles, lighting, many things can deceive the eye. Victoria twisted her lips into a barely visible smile, that of someone who knows they have control. How curious, because my father says he met that woman, and he remembers her words very well. She almost didn't speak. She let the lawyer negotiate, but her eyes seemed to read every number in his head. I didn't answer. Sometimes silence reveals more than any justification. Victoria twirled the clipping between her fingers. Her voice dropped in tone but became sharper. I went to Wharton. I know that, Mom. I understand how hedge funds, trusts, and shell companies work in the U.S. Things like concealing the ultimate beneficiary owner can cause serious problems. She paused, poured more wine, and ran her finger along the rim of the glass, measuring every word between threat and negotiation. I don't want to think the worst, but if someone at the SEC were to read this file, they would surely be very curious, don't you think? I smiled, slowly rotating my glass on the marble table. Victoria, if you have something to say it directly. She placed the clipping in front of me, interlacing her fingers like someone preparing to close a deal. I don't want a war, mother-in-law. I just think there are things that should be shared. Our family and I emphasize. Family deserves to know what you are hiding. And if my father, or the press, or the SEC finds out first, it wouldn't be good for anyone. A soft breeze came through the window, and a small flower petal fell into my glass. I tilted the glass, watching the purple petal float on the golden wine. Beautiful, but with thorns. You are blackmailing me, Victoria. That word sounds so ugly. I only propose transparency. We can collaborate. You have the capital. I have the knowledge and contacts. We would both win. The silence stretched out. I looked at her and no longer saw a daughter-in-law, but a young negotiator testing her strength. She didn't know she was playing on a board I had built myself before she was born. I left the glass on the table, keeping my voice serene. If you really studied business administration, you would know that every major operation must be audited, be legal, and have clear documentation. The SEC knows that better than anyone. Victoria tilted her head, eyes full of defiance. True, but not everyone wants those documents reviewed so thoroughly, especially when their name doesn't appear on the shareholder list. This time I didn't hide my smile. You are smarter than I thought. And you are more skilled than I imagined, she replied, raising her glass to clink with mine. The metallic sound expanded, cold and precise. The waiter brought the main course, but neither of us touched it. The air between us became thick, like an unsigned contract whose content we both understood too well. When the meal was about to end, Victoria took out her phone, swiped across the screen, and placed it in front of me. An email drafted to a recognized financial journalist appeared. The subject line read, "Investigation. The hidden investor behind the Sterling Group." Below, the body of the message was barely a draft, but enough to show how prepared she was. "I haven't sent it yet," she said with a strangely soft voice. "I still have hope that we can talk like family." I looked her straight in the eyes with a strange calm. "You don't understand, Victoria. You are entering a game whose map you have never seen. Then just tell me the right path." She stood up first. The sweet smile returned to her lips, as if the conversation had been about fashion or travel. "Thanks for lunch, mother-in-law. I'll wait for you to contact me. Oh, and make sure it's not the SEC who calls first." When the glass door closed behind her, I noticed my hands were trembling. The old newspaper clipping was still there, the ink smeared by a wine stain. Outside, the Manhattan sun beat down harder. I took my phone and wrote a brief line to Danielle. "Prepare everything. They've started." I let my finger hover for a moment over the screen, as if with one more character, everything would come crashing down. I took a deep breath and looked up. Against the sky, the glass towers reflected a light so intense it hurt. Their beauty lay in transparency. And suddenly I understood that the time had come to be transparent in my own way, before others forced me to do so. That afternoon, New York City seemed covered by a silvery sheen over the high windows of the financial district. Traffic was still gridlocked. Horns mixed with the wind between the skyscrapers, bringing the smell of exhaust and the heat of the asphalt. I took the elevator up to the 23rd floor and saw my face reflected in the frosted mirror. The expression was serene, but deep in my eyes, I knew the game had truly begun. The door to the RE Capital office opened. The smell of new paper and roasted coffee filled the space. Danielle Parker was waiting for me at the glass table, surrounded by screens with financial charts, asset maps, and dozens of thick files. Seeing me, she didn't say hello. She extended her hand toward the wall, covered in sticky notes and images. "Please, look. This is the real picture of the Sterling family." I stepped closer. On the map, red arrows connected liabilities. Residence in Greenwich, Connecticut, mortgaged at 80%. 3 luxury cars bought on installment plans via leasing. Personal credit limits maxed out. 2 small companies showing practically zero revenue. Danielle pointed to a note in the right corner. And this is the most interesting part. Mr. Sterling's only constant source of money is an energy consulting contract paid by Nova Power, your subsidiary. I sketched a smile that didn't reach my eyes. In other words, they live off my money. Not only do they live off it, they cling to it like their last life preserver. I stood silent in front of the map. The crossed lines looked like a spiderweb, a family that believed itself untouchable, rotting from the inside. Danielle continued with an even voice, but with a new spark in her eyes I had never seen before. "That's not all. You should see this." She placed a gray folder tied with a red ribbon before me. I opened it. Inside was a copy of a prenuptial agreement with the names David Ellison and Victoria Sterling barely visible. I frowned. "Prenup?" "I remember David said they didn't sign anything." Danielle nodded. "Exactly. This document is fake, but it's drafted with great skill. It includes a clause stating that assets generated after the marriage will be considered common property, and it has electronic signatures forged with great care. If we hadn't reviewed the metadata thoroughly, we would have considered it valid. I touched the paper with my fingertips. It smelled of fresh ink, not a document from 3 years ago. When did she prepare this? According to the IP trace, about 6 months before the engagement, and she used part of a credit card opened in her name to pay the fees of the firm that drafted this draft. A shiver ran down my spine. So, from the beginning, Victoria planned it all. Danielle nodded, leaning in to show me the screen. A timeline appeared, small, scattered payments initiated while they were still dating. And here, she said, opening another folder, we discovered transfers to Naples Agency, a private detective firm. She hired them to follow you for 3 months before the wedding. I clenched my fists but kept my voice serene. Are there photographs? Yes, but I don't think you should see them. They are taken from a distance. The apartment in Queens, your office in Hudson Yards, even the times you went to your late husband's grave. She wanted to know everything. I turned toward the wide window. Below, the city continued flowing under a dim light. I remembered noon in Midtown. Victoria's smile, her sweet but icy voice. Every word of hers took on a new meaning. It wasn't improvisation, it was a calculated script. Danielle moved a little closer, lowering her voice. She isn't just curious, ma'am. She wants to control everything. This fake prenup was just the first step. If you had yielded at the restaurant today, she would have used the document as proof of shared will regarding assets to present in court. With her Wharton background, she knows perfectly well how to twist the law in her favor. I took a deep breath, speaking slowly. Then we must get ahead of them. Gather all the evidence, IPs, invoices, receipts, transfers. We need to prepare a counterattack file. Danielle nodded, her gaze sharp as a razor. I already started. I also asked internal audit to review all contracts linked to the Sterling Group. It seems Arthur doesn't know anything, but someone in his family, possibly Victoria's brother, figures as an intermediary in several dubious operations. I turned, leaning on the table. A dense weariness rose in my chest like a wave. Danielle, I don't want to destroy a family, but if they try to sink me and David, I won't stand by with my arms crossed. She looked at me, nodding slowly. I understand, but you also know this is no longer just a family matter. It is a power game. I remained silent, listening to the slight hum of the air conditioning. Outside, the sunset slipped between the buildings. The cars on the avenues turned on their yellow lights like a river of fire surrounding the city. I approached the table, went over the files one more time, and touched the photograph of Victoria smiling next to David at the wedding. Now I only saw it as evidence of a perfect conspiracy. She thinks she is clever, I murmured, but she forgets there are women who have spent a lifetime in silence just to learn how to fight with that same silence. Danielle smiled, tilting her head slightly. I will prepare the full analysis in 3 days. You just need to be ready when the moment comes to decide. I nodded, took the fake prenup, folded it, and put it in my bag. The light from the lamps reflected in the glass, superimposing my face over the blinking charts. A strange image, fragile and strong at the same time. Walking out into the hallway, the sunset light cut through the windows, dyeing the air an intense orange. I stopped, looking toward the city, where Victoria was surely sitting in her luxury apartment, convinced she held the knife by the handle. But she didn't know that somewhere else, I had just sharpened my own blade. The next morning, the New York sky was covered in clouds. Mist grazed the tall buildings of Manhattan. I arrived at the office earlier than usual. The glass still had dewdrops, and the conference table reflected the pale light of dawn. Every breath mixed with the smell of paper, black coffee, and the sensation of being about to start a battle I couldn't lose. Attorney Campbell, my lawyer, arrived promptly at 8 a.m. His leather briefcase, worn by the years, was as orderly as his character. His voice, grave and husky, never wasted a word. I have reviewed all the documentation Danielle sent. If Miss Sterling wants to involve the SEC, we must be at least 2 steps ahead. Transparency, Rose. So much of it that no one can use the truth against you. I nodded. We sat face to face over the table, a thick box of files labeled in black letters. Transparency, compliance. They weren't simple papers. They were the only shield between me and what Victoria was planning. Campbell opened the first file, speaking in a paused but firm tone, every word falling like a hammer blow. First layer. The compliance file. I need independent legal opinion letters from 3 different firms, certifying that your corporation's structure and trusts are totally legitimate, without pure concealment of the ultimate beneficiary. We will deliver copies to the SEC before they even ask. I listened to him with a mixture of relief and a sharp pang. What I had kept secret for 20 years now had to be shown like an old, exposed scar. But I understood that to protect what really matters, sometimes you have to let others see you without defense. Second layer? I asked, turning the page where he had written some notes in blue ink. Contractual leverage, he replied. The consulting contract between your subsidiary and Arthur Sterling has a cancellation clause with 30 days' notice without cause. If they keep pressuring, just send the termination notice. It's not a hard blow, but enough for them to understand who holds their weak point. I looked at the cold letters on the page. That contract had been my way of helping a man who lost everything after the economic crisis. Now it had become a double-edged sword, one side to cut the threat and the other to wound my own compassion. Arthur has nothing to do with this, I said in a low voice. Perhaps, but his daughter must choose, protect her greed or protect her family. That statement fell into the silence like a stone in a deep well. I didn't answer. Instead, I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, it began to rain. The drops slid down the glass like thousands of fine threads connecting me to the world, where everyone kept living calmly while I was about to sacrifice that peace for the truth. And the third layer? I asked with a firmer voice. Campbell pushed a sealed envelope toward me, the solution to buy peace, an offer impossible to refuse. $10 million, with an absolute NDA and a total forfeiture clause if there is any leak. We don't threaten, we just put a price on silence. I took the envelope. The cold slid through my palm. 10 million. That figure didn't scare me. What made me shudder was having to use money to buy peace within my own family. And if they refuse? I asked. Campbell narrowed his eyes, took a sip of coffee. Then we give them another option, total transparency. That way, no one can use the truth against you. But prepare yourself, because when the lid of this Pandora's box is opened, there will be no way to close it. I remained silent. For years I had lived hidden in a calm I believed safe, but now I understood that silence had become my weakness. I returned to the table, opened the box of files, and observed the white sheets among dozens of red stamps. Each stamp was a reminder. The truth is not to be feared. It just needs to be presented correctly. I want to sign everything myself. No powers of attorney, no hidden names. If we are going to be transparent, I will be so all the way. Campbell smiled with that slow nod of someone who has seen hundreds of life-or-death negotiations. Good. Because only those who have nothing to hide are truly strong. I sat down, took the pen, and signed the first sheet of the compliance report. The ink absorbed little by little, expanding in a pale blue trail, like the rain on the glass. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, and the drops hit with more force. In the closed room, only the sound of pages and our breathing remained. Campbell gathered the copies, placed them in a large envelope marked confidential. When he left, I followed him with my gaze. Inside me, relief and vertigo mixed, like someone on the edge of a precipice who knows they must jump but still fears doing so. I went back to the table. I picked up the pen he had left. It was heavy and cold, engraved with the words, Lex Veritas, the law is the truth. I smiled barely. Transparency was a weapon, as he said, but for me, it was also the beginning of a war I had to win, even if it was with my own blood. That afternoon, the sun of the financial district bathed the city, but in the glass room on the 17th floor, no warmth was felt. The air had a metallic smell mixed with the HVAC system, as if the space itself knew a confrontation was approaching. Opposite me, Victoria sat next to her lawyer, Mr. O'Reilly, with an air of almost arrogant confidence. She wore an impeccable cream suit, hair pulled back, eyes cold and bright like blades. When I entered with Campbell, she gave me the perfect smile of someone who believes they have won before starting the battle. "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Ellison," Victoria said with a sweet voice, but full of thorns. "I think we all want to close this in a professional manner." Campbell placed his leather portfolio on the table and unzipped it slowly. I sat down. The light entering through the window behind me reflected on the shiny surface of the table, illuminating the thick files waiting like face-down cards. Victoria took the floor with the firm tone of someone feeling in control. According to the SEC, hiding the true owner of a company can be considered a violation of mandatory disclosure. I have enough material to demonstrate that you— She paused for an instant, looking directly at me. Were the one behind the purchase of Sterling Holdings, without revealing your real identity. I didn't answer, just tilted my head slightly. Campbell remained silent, flipping through some pages. The sound of the paper was brief but forceful. Do you have concrete proof? He asked. Victoria smiled smugly, took a printed sheet from her bag, and left it on the table. Photographs, bank records, and some internal sources. I won't say who, of course, but if necessary, the SEC will find them. I let her speak. Her voice became increasingly sharp, mixing security and a kind of theatrical excitement. Meanwhile, inside me, only one sensation remained, a calm so absolute it was scary. When she stopped to drink water, that was when I calmly opened my box of documents. Inside was a folder marked Transparency, Compliance, and another thinner file wrapped in an ash-gray folder. I pushed the large folder toward the center of the table. Before anything else, I want you to see this. O'Reilly raised an eyebrow. Victoria glanced sideways at Campbell and then opened the folder. Inside were all the compliance certificates, legal opinion letters from 3 independent law firms confirming that my company's structure was completely legitimate. Next to that, a copy of the receipt acknowledgement from the SEC dated yesterday. You're late, I said with a serene voice. I published everything before you tried to threaten me. The room fell silent for a few seconds. Victoria sketched a forced smile, but I noticed her hands trembling as she put the file on the table. Campbell intervened with his grave and deliberate tone. And this, he said, taking another set of sheets from his portfolio, is the financial report we obtained. The Sterling family owes more than $2 million. You have 3 leased cars overdue, and the residence in Greenwich is still under mortgage. I don't think you want that to become public, do you? Victoria's face changed color. She leaned forward, trying to maintain composure. That is my family's private business. It is, I replied, and I have no intention of getting involved. But I want you to understand something. Don't call this justice when you are standing on my money. I took out a small bundle of papers tied with a red ribbon from my bag. And this, I said, lowering my voice, is a copy of emails between you and a certain Mark Sterling. Journalist, right? Your cousin. Victoria froze. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. I continued. The emails were obtained legally. Mark works at the Wall Street Journal, and in one of them, you wrote, "If she doesn't cooperate, I'll make the story public." You know how to write it so it looks like a legitimate investigation. The temperature in the room dropped. O'Reilly looked at her. Incredulous. Victoria stammered. That was a misunderstanding. I didn't. I put my hand on the table and interrupted her. Enough lies. I don't want to destroy you, Victoria. But don't ever use my honor as a bargaining chip. I opened the second file and placed the documents of the purchase of her father's company on the table. Do you know why I did it? I looked her straight in the eyes. Because I didn't want hundreds of people to lose their jobs. Because your father was a decent man. Even though he failed, I didn't buy to take away. I bought to save. And you turned that into my sin. My voice wasn't loud, but every word fell like a stone. Victoria remained silent, hands clenched on her legs. For an instant, I saw in her eyes not defiance, but fear, the fear of someone who has just realized she crossed the line. Campbell slid the NDA document we had prepared toward her. This is the only way to close everything in peace. You keep your reputation. Your family keeps the consulting contract, and we all avoid an unnecessary lawsuit. Victoria bit her lip, looking at me sideways. I said nothing, just observed her calmly, without hate. Because in that moment I knew the true victory wasn't seeing the enemy fall, but making them see themselves naked in front of the truth. She lowered her head, her voice barely a whisper. I need time to review it. You have 24 hours, Campbell answered dryly. After that, the offer expires. Victoria got up, took her bag, and rushed out. Her heels clicked on the floor with a dry thud. When the door closed, I exhaled. My shoulders finally relaxed. The light of the city filtered through the windows, illuminating the table where the transparency folder remained open, glowing in a pale blue tone the color of exposed truth, without the need to shout to be believed. The air in the boardroom, after her departure, remained thick like undissipated smoke. I stayed still, leaning back in the chair, looking out the window where the city extended like a labyrinth of steel and light. Below, people kept walking with coffees in hand, hailing taxis, closing deals. Meanwhile, I had just come out of a battle where every word had been a blade. The door burst open. David entered with a tense face, tie loose, eyes red like someone who had just driven through rain. "Mom." His voice was hoarse. I saw her downstairs. I didn't turn around. "What did she tell you?" "Not much. Just that I should talk to you because you're buying your own honor." I closed my eyes. Victoria still didn't understand. Honor isn't bought. It is upheld in silence. David approached, leaning both hands on the glass of the table. He was breathing with difficulty. "Mom, I want to know everything." "You know enough." "No, Mom. I know what others told me, not what you have told me." I looked up. In the reflection of the city, I saw his face, that boy who once asked me, "Mom, are you tired?" when I came home late from work. Now his eyes were different. A mix of love and doubt, of a son and a man wanting to live up to his mother. I interlaced my hands and spoke slowly. I offered Victoria $10 million. In exchange, she will sign a confidentiality agreement, and we will keep her father's consulting contract for 5 years. No one will fall. Not even them. David clenched his fists. "You did it to protect who? Them or me?" "Both. But first, myself." He remained silent. His gaze settled on the open folder on the table. His lips tightened. "Do you know how I feel? Like my whole life has been a stage. And you, the director, I just followed the script you wrote." His words hurt like a stab wound, but I didn't react. I only asked, "And what are you going to do?" He looked at me for a long time. Then suddenly he sighed. His voice came out firm but serene. "I won't let her drag you down anymore." I told Victoria. "I won't accept a marriage based on blackmail," and I filed the separation papers. She cried, but I know it wasn't for love. It was for losing power. I tilted my head, feeling my heart beat slowly. "Are you sure, David?" "Sure. For the first time in my life, I know I'm defending what's right." I looked at him, and inside me, a strange emotion welled up, a mixture of pain and relief. Maybe I was wrong to hide so much from him, but perhaps that blow turned him into the man he needed to be. Campbell re-entered with his phone in hand. He gestured. He had received the confirmation email. "She agreed to sign, but she wants to add a clause to protect her father," he said. "Keep the 5-year contract," I replied without hesitation. Campbell nodded. "I also suggest adding a clawback clause. If there are leaks, all the money is recovered, and Arthur's contract is canceled immediately. Do you agree?" I looked at him, and then at David. "Agreed." Campbell left the room, leaving the two of us in the middle of the silence. Outside, it began to rain. The tiny drops interlaced and slid down the glass like rows of memories. David sat slowly beside me. "Mom," he said softly, "I'm sorry for letting Victoria go this far. I thought I was in love, but really I just wanted to prove I was already a man. Now I understand that there are people who approach to see how much you have, not who you are." I put my hand on his. That hand, larger and rougher, still trembled like the first day he learned to drive. "You don't have to apologize. Everyone has their lesson, David. The important thing is not to let others define you by their mistakes." He smiled slightly, a sad but sincere smile. "And now what are you going to do, Mom?" "Finish everything." And then, silence. Sometimes victory doesn't need to be proclaimed. We stayed listening to the rain against the roof. Outside, the city lights reflected in the drops like shattered diamonds. After a while, my phone vibrated. A message from Campbell. Signed. The NDA enters into force. Wire transfer in 24 hours. Consulting contract remains. All concluded. I read it again and put the phone down, looking out the window. The rain was easing, but the trails of water still hadn't dried. David looked at me, his eyes calmer. "Mom," he said, "thanks for teaching me not how to win, but how to get up when I'm betrayed." I nodded. I no longer felt resentment toward Victoria, only a deep weariness, that of someone who has lived too long by force of reason. The rain became a final drip on the glass. I stood up and closed the folder. The dry click of the cover sounded like the closing of a toxic chapter. David stood beside me in silence. In the dim light, our shadows lengthened over the glass. In that instant, I knew we had just come out of a storm. No one won, but we both saved ourselves. One morning in December, I opened the window of the new house in Charleston and took a deep breath. The scent of magnolias mixed with the smell of freshly brewed coffee from the bakery on the corner. A breeze brought the rumble of an old trolley passing by. I leaned on the frame, watching the early sun fall on the pastel yellow wall for the first time in years. I lived as myself, without a role, without a mask. The house wasn't huge, but every corner had the stillness I needed. Phones didn't ring all day anymore. There were no more meetings in glass rooms where every gaze wanted to guess what I was hiding. Just me, the old wooden table, some pots of hydrangeas, and a mind, finally, at calm. News of Victoria traveled faster than I imagined. The divorce closed in less than 6 weeks. Fast, cold, without aftertaste. She left the U.S. almost as soon as she signed, flew to London, and her social media filled with champagne, silks, and dinners under warm lights. I saw them once and turned off the screen. I know that shine. The more light, the deeper the shadow. Arthur kept the consulting contract for 5 years, as I promised, but I know he changed. One afternoon he called me from Greenwich. His voice was hoarse, tired. "Rose, I want to thank you for not cutting off my livelihood." "No one deserves to be pushed off a cliff, Arthur," I told him. "Especially those who already know what it is to lose everything." He remained silent and only added, "I hope someday Victoria understands." After that call, I stayed silent for a long time. I knew he wasn't speaking to excuse, but to ask forgiveness for someone else. There are wounds that, even if we don't cause them, force us to carry them in silence. In the following months, David and I learned to talk to each other as real people, not characters in a long play. At night, we sat on the porch with a smooth bourbon and slices of orange. He told me about work. I told him about my days in the lab with his father, about the dream of making cheap batteries for farmers in rural areas. Once he said to me, "You know, Mom, my boss said something weird. He said, 'Now I understand why you're so good. Because you no longer need to prove anything to anyone.'" I smiled. "See? In the end, they respect you because you deserve it, not because of what they think I have." He looked at me with tenderness and shook his head, laughing softly. "Now I just want to be a tenth of what you are." I laughed, and inside something softened like wax. After so many years between silences, lies, and expensive lessons, we finally told each other the truth. And that saved what money never buys: trust. During that time, I began to make a part of who I am public, not to show off, but because it was time to use the truth as light. I founded the Rose Ellison Foundation to support young engineers in the U.S. with scholarships, laboratories, and mentorship. I remember the first press conference in the courtyard of Georgia Tech. Simple folding tables, students with gray hoodies and eyes lit with faith. A student approached with a trembling voice. "Mrs. Ellison, were you really a circuit design engineer?" I nodded. "Yes, and I once failed with a project to the point of wanting to quit. But someone told me, failure is just the first step of patience. I want to repeat that to you." The girl's eyes watered. "Thank you, ma'am." That afternoon, leaving, I saw David from afar, leaning on the railing, with a warm and proud smile. He said nothing, but I understood. He had forgiven me, not with words, but by accompanying me. At night, back home, I sat at the desk and opened a new notebook. On the cover, I wrote, "The truth can also heal." Sometimes they ask me if I fear being scrutinized now that I've come into the light. I answer, after living half a life in the shadow, the light no longer scares me. From my window, I see David leave the office every afternoon. He continues with his old car, sleeves rolled up, the calm pace of someone who no longer has anything to prove. I know the road is long, but we started a new chapter where everything, even the wounds, has its true name. And in that dawn, between church bells and the smell of coffee in the streets of Charleston, I understood. Peace does not come from hiding the past, but from looking at it straight on and continuing light without resentment. That Sunday, the sky over Charleston was strangely clear. The sun spilled over the plaza, filtering through the old oak trees, painting the wall of the historic church in gold. The bells rang grave and warm, as if stretching time so everyone would walk slower, speak softly, and breathe deeply. I held Sophie in my arms, my first granddaughter rosy skin, eyes clear like tender honey. She smiled in her sleep, and I asked myself, how can a being so small give so much peace to the heart? To one side, David and Isabella were talking with the priest. There was no designer wedding dress, no white flowers, no orchestra, just a small and simple mass, but with a light that no party could equal. The light falling from the stained glass onto their faces, mixing shades of green, amber, and deep red. I watched my son take the hand of the woman he chose, and I saw in his eyes that no scars from the past remained, only faith that faith I had lost, and that was now reborn in a new generation. When the priest prayed, the organ sounded slow and deep. Each note floated under the high ceiling. I leaned down and whispered into Sophie's ear, "Little one, I promise you something. I will never hide anything important from you. No secret is worth more than trust, do you understand?" The baby stirred. Her tiny hand squeezed my finger with force, more than I imagined. That small gesture made me feel my heart break into 1,000 pieces, not of pain, but of a new freedom. After the Mass, everyone gathered in the atrium. Isabella laughed, radiant. Her hair moved with the wind, and her hand remained joined to David's. There were no luxurious dresses or expensive drinks, just sincere looks and the aroma of hot cider floating in the air. I saw them walk out into the sun and remembered that day, so many years ago, when I too left a church like that, loaded with illusions that were later lost among years of ambition. But unlike me, David and Isabella knew how to start with the truth. At sunset, when everyone had left, I stayed in a small room of the church together with Attorney Campbell. He placed a thick file tied with red thread in front of me. On the cover, it read, "Last Will and Testament, Trust of Rose Ellison." I took the pen and looked at my name. For the first time, it wasn't a symbol of power, but the promise of a woman who understood the value of truth. "Everything is ready, Mrs. Ellison," Campbell said softly. "Just need your signature." I nodded and opened to the last page. Under the description of the fund's purpose, I wrote in blue ink, "David, my son, money is only a tool. Family is the boundary we must protect with the truth." As the ink dried, I felt a door closing slowly behind me, without noise, without regret. Everything was in its place. Power returned to its correct meaning, and family above all. Campbell put away the documents and commented, "You know, few choose to close like this. Without spectacle, without running away." I smiled. The end needs no noise, only honesty. That night, returning home, the kitchen was still warm. Isabella was preparing hot cocoa. David was placing a vase with magnolias on the table. The small house filled with laughter, the murmur of boiling water, and the clinking of a spoon against a glass. I stayed in the doorway watching the yellow light spill over the walls of worn plaster. Sophie slept in the crib. She moved a little, opening her eyes to look at the lamp. I sat by her side, took her tiny hand, and felt something strange. For the first time in my life, I didn't need to hide anything from anyone. Outside, the night wind passed between the trees, bringing the echo of the church bells. I heard Isabella's soft voice from the kitchen. "David, I think our girl will be strong like your mother." "No," he replied with a grave and warm voice. "She will be strong and compassionate, because your mother taught me that only the truth feeds kindness." I smiled. My eyes stung a little. From the porch, the light formed a golden strip on the floor, as soft as the breath of time. There was no noise or hidden plans anymore, just a small house, people who found each other again, and a serene light crossing the window panes, not coming from the sky, but from the hearts that dared to say, love, and live with truth. Sometimes I think life is like that light filtered by the church, stained glass, not perfect, but sufficient to reveal every crack and turn it into color. I learned that the truth isn't cold, it only waits for us to have the courage to look at it. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched your heart, hit like, subscribe, and tell me, if you were in my place, what would you do? Because maybe your words today could give warmth to someone who needs hope.